Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video today about why it took me so long to come out with these videos, speak my truth, expose all of these individuals who've been involved in all of this long-term corruption and crimes against me, what's all behind that, and why I'm speaking out now versus any other time in the past. So I guess we could start back with the fact that my mother had created so much chaos and destruction all along the way throughout the course of my entire life, my entire childhood and adult life, that by the time I made it to my first home, I was still in fight or flight mode as I had been my entire life. And I also had a new baby in a new home, and I was working full time as well. So, and I was in school full time. All of that was going on during that first year or so. It was a solid year with no break once I finally got myself to safety and into my new home at 18 years old. And it only continued on from there. So once I was put in the chaotic flow of my own life, what was going on and why it was so chaotic was also due to my mother's criminal actions and harassment behind the scenes from that point forward as well. It took me some time to figure out she was behind all of that. I did not realize this right away. I was still in chaos. My first baby was screaming 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a night, every night for the first year of his life. So I was not sleeping either. I didn't sleep well for about 2 years, being into my first home for about 2 years. And it just stayed extremely chaotic and continued on from that point forward. And with my mother using large agencies and people to continuously harass me from behind the scenes during all of that, I never got my footing enough to dig further, deeper, or look anything into this because we had no contact. As soon as I moved into that first home, there was no contact, no relationship. There hadn't been a relationship the entire time. So it wasn't at the top of my mind that she was causing all of this. I just did not realize for some time. I just knew that I had to deal with what was coming at me and all of the problems and destruction that was coming at me. However, she was the one causing all of this, using all these people and agencies. So the entire time, I remained trying to keep things afloat while working very hard, while having these kids and this home, and trying to maintain everything, not realizing why I was having all of these problems. And then eventually got forced into my next home sooner than I should have been ready to get into my next home. Even though I was getting very close to making that next move, I was forced into it due to the harassment and the crimes. And then it became even more chaotic all over again. By then I had 2 kids, and it just remained chaotic the entire time as I continued to work. And at the time I was in the second home is when the mortgage crisis hit as well. So the economy was taking a dive. The amount of money I was used to making in the fields I had been in for some time, it was a high dollar amount. But that amount was being lowered, and what I had built to that point forward did not allow me to take a step back and make less money or go some other route. When the industries I was in were very well paying, that wasn't the problem. The problem was the economy. So all I had to do was wait that time period out, wait for things to balance back out and pick back up, which did eventually happen. That only happened for a short period of time. But with the amount of chaos and destruction and how everything was going on for all of this long period of time, and it continued on, I realized there was a very serious problem in 2013. So I bought my first home in 2002. In 2013 is when I realized this is way deeper than I realized. The problem is bigger than I initially thought. I still didn't have all the pieces, but I knew something was more wrong and that none of this was normal. None of this should have been going on. It stayed that chaotic. It stayed with me having numerous streams of income, taking my kids to school, picking them up. It stayed that way for some years. And then once the 2013 escapade hit, um, that's when I knew my older 2 kids had to be removed away from my parents' home. They were not allowed to regularly go there as they were allowed to in the past. And there was periods of time along the way where they weren't over there at all for many months, groups of times. This was happening throughout the course of time because I run my life a certain way. I had numerous different sets of people to help me with the way I was running things, and depending on where I was living at, which house I was in, what was going on during those time periods, they were removed from being around them for several time periods. But once the 2013 escapade hit, and I realized my mother was a lot more deranged than I initially thought, and the problems are a lot more extreme, I took further action to make sure they just weren't allowed over there all that often. And it stayed that way going forward. It never reverted back to where they were just allowed to freely go over there. They were still minors. And picking up the pieces from that escapade then led me to a little further down the line, then becoming severely injured. About 5 years from that point forward is when I became severely injured. And it was still very chaotic for those 5 years of me trying to pick up the pieces to all the destruction and the chaos my mother had caused, all the wipeouts, all the financial problems she had caused, all the setbacks and restarts, because at that point, that was the third complete restart I had had from the age 18, that she was behind all of them. So as far as my kids went, I just didn't allow them to go over there very often. From that point forward, we actually cut my dad off for about a year or two solidly along with my mother, because he was the enabler. He was allowing this to go on. She had been repeating so many delusions to him over the course of my entire life that he wasn't operating in reality. Although he did not act toward me the way she did, and we maintained a separate relationship, he also had to be removed a little further out than how we had things with him, due to his participation in the crimes he was helping her commit, believing these delusions she kept telling him about me, and him never realizing that the things that she's saying to him aren't real. And that's all just delusions. And that's not who I am as a person. That's not what I have going on in my life. And she just continuously repeated delusions to him. So once I bought this home in 2017, they pretty much didn't go over there. I mean, they already weren't for a couple of years prior to that, but they didn't go over there even less. But then my dad was more welcome to come to my home again, as he was in the past. Still, my mother wasn't allowed in any of my houses. I do believe she came here once or twice, and she manipulated my dad into allowing herself to come to my house. But if that had not happened, it was a strange situation how it even happened in the first place. But she should have never even been here in the first place. But with how all of that happened, we just remained completely separate, with my dad just going back to coming in and out of my home the way he always had, and she was completely separate at her home. So with all of that chaos going on, and me being forced to rebuild, restart, all the way from nothing, all these times over again, when there was no problem with my income at any point during this, there was no problem with my level of education. I am self-made, self-built. I'd acquired more knowledge with the education that I did pursue, along with my life experience along the way. I realized in my mid-20s, when I was taking some more college classes, that at no time did I ever need to be there, and I saw the bigger picture of what's going on in the world. I'm way ahead of what they're trying to teach in the world. I'm several levels ahead of that already as a self-made individual. So I knew right then and there that was no longer necessary. I had seen the way bigger picture of how things work, how to operate around them, how to build ahead of what the education system is teaching the general public, and I was already way ahead of that. So once I got moved into this house, and I got injured about 6 months after moving in, so it was January 2018, I had the second brain injury. So the first brain injury was me giving birth while suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. That was March of 2016. I began having flashbacks from that day, from the time I gave birth on. And it was all flashbacks of memories that I did not know I was missing. It continued on. It stayed pretty significant for a couple years. And then once I had the second brain injury in January of 2018, even more memories came back. It was about a year and a half from that point forward is where so like mid 2019, where the majority of the memories between 2016 and 2019 had all come back. These were all verifiable. A lot of them were verifiable. So I knew what I was remembering was my actual memories. It wasn't just something that popped into my head and I'm running with it. These were all actual memories, which I began to verify shortly after they started happening after I had the baby. There was numerous ways I went about verifying those. But then I realized that I wasn't sure why I was missing the memories, but it dawned on me down the line that it was due to the amount of chaos and destruction my mother had caused along the way, along with me being in a state of fight or flight mode my entire life. And it was just so chaotic and so fast paced all of that time up into my injury that there was never any time to stop and think about this or that. There was no dwelling on anything or stopping to even process any of what was going on at any point along the way. So once the injury occurred, that's when I was more incapacitated due to the brain injuries. Your brain is what controls your functioning. It controls the entire body. So when your brain is injured, you then lose functioning depending on the degree of brain injury. Mine were two very serious ones. So I was incapacitated for about 3 years straight from 2018 to the end of 2020. So I stayed that way. And due to the fact that I couldn't get up and do things like a normal person, and I literally had to lay there and allow my brain to rest, it was causing memories to come back. Or if what little things I was doing, certain things would cause memories to come back, things that would happen along the way. And they all came back during that 3-year time span. And once I started treatment in 2019, the brain tissue began repairing with the hyperbaric oxygen treatments. The treatments were doing more than one thing. They were removing the carbon monoxide at a cellular level from my system, and they were also repairing the brain tissue. My entire blood-brain barrier, the entire outer layer of the brain, everything, all the layers of the brain all the way around had been completely destroyed with the second brain injury, all throughout the entire brain, all the way down to the base of my neck, all the way up. Everything had been destroyed. So as I started treatment, all of that tissue started repairing. And as it was repairing and as the knots of carbon monoxide were being removed from the internal parts of my brain, there was huge knots of it deep internally inside my brain also. So there was numerous problems going on, all from the carbon monoxide. Everything was caused by the carbon monoxide overload in January of 2018. So when that all started happening and I started treatment, the memories started coming back. The memories were so like clear. There was no question about what I was remembering. There was no doubt in my mind that everything was 100% how I was remembering it. It was as if it had just happened. So once that brain tissue started repairing, that was the result. And it took years of everyday treatment to even cross that first threshold. It took almost 2 years of everyday treatment to cross the first threshold, which was 3 years into the injury. Now, it doesn't mean everything was fine from that point forward. I still remained in a very fragile state. My cells, my entire body, my brain, it was extremely fragile, and I still was requiring daily treatment to continue to cross further thresholds and to continue to repair the brain tissue and remove the carbon monoxide. That is still going on today. This is not in the past. It's not I crossed that threshold and I'm fine now and I've been fine all this time. That's not what's going on. I'm permanently injured. There's no way to clear 100% of what I took in with the degree of injury that I suffered from just with the carbon monoxide alone and the amount of time I went without treatment once it became extreme. There's no way to ever clear 100% of that ever. So that is still going on today. It's just that I've crossed numerous thresholds. I'm not as fragile, although we are fragile having to live modified lives. So that is always going to be our case. That is why. And then the brain injuries, and then I acquired numerous more down the line as well, taking pretty large steps backwards, having to continue on with treatment. And then with how I lost the ability to maintain treatment, it caused a further issue. And now the center's closed, so the degree of treatment that I need isn't available. So where I am right now, I'm not in the best place, and I'm going to be living this way for the rest of my life. I'm always going to have to accommodate all of that. And I know people are judging me on what I look like or what they see me doing, but the reality is I live this way. I live sick, and it's been this way for 7.5 years. So you have to get used to that. And it doesn't appear that there's anything wrong to other individuals, even though there's something very seriously wrong. And when it comes to those brain injuries, most people don't ever have that type of money to go through that type of treatment to repair any type of brain injury to that degree, let alone 5 of them, which I did to a certain degree. So when all of that started happening, I did get to a significant place in 2019 where the memories started to cease. Once the brain tissue repaired to a certain degree, and once a certain degree of the carbon monoxide was removed from the knots that were loaded up in my brain and then throughout my system, it was causing the memories had already came back, and then they started to cease. So from that point to where I am today, 6 years later, there's very few times that memories come back. It's not all that often, although they do. I do have the majority of my memories back. They've been back. But I do believe that the reason that they were all missing was due to the amount of extreme chaos and destruction that I was forced to accommodate and live through. And there was no other way around it due to my mother's criminal actions. So, with all that happening and the amount of chaos and how I was forced to live my life, and then still have to try to rebuild everything I was already building all along the way, there was no time to ever stop and think about any of this. There was no time to address any of this or go to any authorities during any of this. And little did I know, even if I had the time, they were actually involved in the crime. So it wouldn't have done me any good either. But at that point, nothing had happened yet. I just, remained treating every day. I was struggling through each day, barely alive. I stayed in that state for 3 years straight. My brain was sagging and continuously swelling, and every regular sound on top of louder sounds would radiate extreme pain throughout around where all those knots of carbon monoxide were in my brain. It radiated extreme pain outwards from each of those knots with every sound, every word I spoke, or every word I was forced to yell, or what other people were yelling at me. So it stayed that way for some time. There was no way I could go about addressing anything regarding any of these matters. I was barely alive, literally just struggling through each day, not knowing if my son and I are going to live. And we were just forced to stay that way, hoping someday there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. It took well over $100,000 out of pocket before I reached that light at the end of the tunnel where we knew that we weren't going to die immediately. And that there might be a possibility of a future life, because there was no quality of life for 5 solid years straight. It was literally just laying here, extreme pain and suffering, extreme physical distress. Half of those days spent near the toilet, can't go anywhere, can't leave home, can't have the elements of the outside world, stuck that way for about 5 years. There was no option to go around this. The only way out was to continue treating every day. So that is what I did in order to get all of that back in line. And coming out of that, my mother had created more extreme chaos and destruction shortly after crossing that first threshold. And still under daily treatment, she then created more destruction and chaos. So it continued on from there, just forced to juggle all this, forced to try to make sure we don't slide backwards any further with the amount of treatments we had already had, with us being forced up out of our home at the end of 2021 and having to go out into the world, running all over the place, picking up all of these particles of different kinds, because the part of the brain that was damaged, it was all layers of the brain. That is what prevents any type of chemical, gas, particle of any kind in the outside world, or anything that you drink, eat, swallow, absorb through the skin, inject, any of that. Any toxins get filtered out through the brain tissue that had been broken within my son and I. And it took all those years and all that treatment to repair it to that certain degree. So once we got back home and situated, we weren't really situated, but we were back in the home, still living with brain bleeding and struggling through each day trying to keep his homeschooling done. We eventually got moved into my house in Ohio. Still extreme chaos because I'm still being forced to try to work. So this is after COVID. I was trying to work what little bit I was, trying to keep things running, trying not to lose anything further, because now at this point I had lost 5 more years. After losing everything else and all those other restarts, here I was, lost all this time. So once I got down to my house in Ohio, another spill, it was a chemical spill from Wixom, Michigan, and it had went well over 100 miles out in every direction. And it made its way down to my house in Ohio, made its way everywhere. And it took some time for that to clear. It took about 4 months or so for that to clear. And I had to shelter in place when I did get moved down to my other house in Ohio in 2022. So shortly after was when my dad fell. Again, more chaos. My mother's creating all the extreme chaos, the destruction, us running all over the place, and just being forced to have to accommodate all of this without my son and I ever recovering from our own injuries. And it went right into my dad being injured. And she continued this on the entire time, all the way until I made my way back into this home at the beginning of 2024. It was the first week of 2024. I then got back into the home to address all the damage that happened while I was gone. Again, all caused by her criminal actions and the criminal actions of all these people and agencies helping her. That was when I finally was able to have some type of like periods of time where I could address some of this. And it was because of the way the homeowners insurance checks were trickling in and how it took so long to get the initial disbursement that was very large, and how the checks came from there. So there was periods of time in between these checks where I was finally able to lay down, rest, sort through my thoughts, fully figure out everything that was going on. I just kept it going all along the way, gathering information along the way as I was being left untreated all those years prior, repeatedly, all the things I had gone through, all these different people's and agencies' actions along that way, finally piecing it all together. I just kept gathering the information every step of the way, knowing that there was a very serious issue, but didn't have the ability to address any of this. So all along the way from the time my brain swelled in 2018, that's when I knew I was supposed to be filming these videos. Along with the other information and knowledge that I acquired along the course of my life, it all plays a role and ties into this. Once I get all of this situated, I will talk about all of that. So I knew from 2018 on I was going to be filming these videos. But again, I could not speak. I could not deliver information. I could not speak properly due to the areas of speech being cut off from the knots of carbon monoxide in my brain and the brain injuries. On top of the fact that I couldn't have sound, I couldn't have my own voice. It wasn't possible. So it was just a matter of getting myself physically, having enough treatment, and getting myself to a place where that could occur. And once all that happened in the beginning of 2024, where I was having these periods of resting in between all of these checks, I was then able to write everything out, get notebooks, try to structure everything on paper of how I'm going to deliver this information. As all those memories came back over the course of the previous, 6 years, here I had structured it all on paper, writing down every section of each set of crimes, each agency, each person, everything that had gone on along the way. Here I was finally getting to write it down. And because the damage was so extensive, and what I'm still working on currently in August 2025 is still tying up the loose ends of the damage to the home, there's all these different periods where there's like a rest period, not really a rest period because I have so many tasks and still so much fallout that I'm trying to pick up the pieces from, that there's really no dead time at all. But once I reached a certain degree of restoring the home about a year ago, once a certain percentage of the work was completed, and then there was periods of time where the checks were still waiting to get trickled in, waiting for the next batch to come so I can work on the next steps. That's where I started being able to actually film some of these videos. So it took about 6 months of me writing everything down. And then I was finally able to start filming what I was talking about, because it took all these years for my brain to be healed enough to even be able to speak long enough to continuously do the videos. It wouldn't have been possible prior to 2024. So about a year ago is when I started filming. And again, I already had it written out on paper. So I kind of had a good idea where I was going to start, where I was going with each subject, with each situation, each set of crimes. I had a pretty good idea of where I was going with it. And then I wanted to make sure I had a certain amount on paper or on film first, because of the amount of crimes and the amount of people and agencies involved. And I do know that my life's in danger and these people do want to take me out and or have me arrested. So I did need to have a certain amount filmed prior to even releasing that first video, because I knew once I started talking, my life was going to become in even more danger. So I did all of that. It took me about 6 months of filming before I was able to even release the first video. And I wanted to be able to release them regularly on some type of regular schedule, so I would at least have some people's attention and not, because with how injured I am, because I'm still injured, I live this way, it's not going to go away. And there is re-exposures, not really re-injury since I've been back here, but there is re-exposures to things. And then that causes me to be incapacitated. It takes days or weeks to clear a cycle or a load of what I've taken in that caused those re-exposures have caused. It takes time out. And then I also can't film the videos when that happens. So when I was doing all this, I wanted to make sure there was enough on film to keep it flowing so that there wouldn't be all these periods where there was no videos being released. I wanted to keep it consistent. So it took all that time to do that. I finally started releasing the videos in January of 2025 and kept the continuous flow all along, literally filmed for a whole year straight before I ever took a break from filming. And it was only due to the damage to the home and the insurance checks and how the money was trickling in that I was able to do all of this. If that had all not happened, I'm not sure I would have been able to do all of this. So it depends on how it would have played out differently had the damage not occurred, and what other crimes and harassment my mother was doing in the background. It would have possibly been able to be done, or maybe not yet, depending on what her criminal activities and the level of it all would have been, given the home didn't have all the damage. Either way you look at it, it's all fallout from her criminal actions and the criminal actions of all these people and agencies helping her. So once I had a good portion of the main floor of the home re-put back together, everything was pretty much intact by the time I had started filming. And there was more chaos because all the problems with my dad's injury and the crimes she was committing regarding all those matters were still going on. But I was wanting to make sure I was filming during all of that because there was just so much. And me actually stating the date in some of these videos and talking about what's going on is the proof in some of these crimes, which I can't really explain in this moment because I haven't released everything. But if you were to line everything up in proof wise, how I have pictures are timestamped, videos are timestamped, what I'm talking about is timestamped. There's documents, there's all types of stuff along the way. It lines up and proves some of these crimes. So I did have to make sure that I was able to keep filming. I kept doing it. And if the damage to the home hadn't happened, it may have took me longer to come out with these videos, but it was the first time I was ever actually able to sit down for long periods of time without having to make sure that I was at my physical place of employment and how I generate my other money all along the way, all these years. It was the first time I didn't have to run off and make sure that that was done every week in order to keep things running. So at the root of everything was making sure that these videos just continued to flow, the information continued to be put on film, and that I continued to release it. So because I had it all written out on paper first, there is a list of different videos, titles to the videos that I'll be releasing. And by the time this all happened, the majority of these memories had all fully come back. And I'm sure I'm still missing a few, but the majority of them have been back for some years. So all I did all that time when it was just too chaotic to address any of this, I just kept gathering the information, watching the crimes play out in front of my face, watching all these people do what they were doing to me, what they were attempting to do, picking up all of their criminal actions and documenting all of it. And that's also the reason I had brought Charmaine in 5.5 years ago, because it was that chaotic initially. And I'd brought her in around the time I still was not knowing if I was going to live or not. And I also had no daily functioning. And I couldn't have brought her in any earlier because I couldn't have even gotten to her office. I was so injured and sick, so close to death, it wasn't even possible. So the very first second I was able to, I brought her in. I told her what was going on. I told her she had to just stay with me, just keep listening to what I'm saying every week. You will see, it will come out. You'll see for yourself, which did happen. It only took a couple months. It did happen. And she saw how chaotic it was and all the disruptions and why I wasn't able to document the amount of crimes myself, why I needed somebody else to see, why this had to be documented in some type of legal way. She started to see right away. And it just wasn't possible for me to physically do myself with everything else I was forced to deal with. So here she was every step of the way. Each week, she's taking the reports on what happened each week, every step of the way, each person's actions, what each person and agency had been doing all along the way. She's got all of it. And there was no way for me to do that myself. And finally, yes, she's still involved today. She's going to stay involved until arrests are made or my mother is deceased, because the crimes aren't going to stop until she's deceased, probably even after that. But yeah, that's how long she's going to stay involved until. That's what she was brought in for. And once I was able to get resituated back in my home in the beginning of 2024, then it wasn't so extremely chaotic. It still gets chaotic from time to time, and there's so much fallout, and I have so many tasks at hand that it is still chaotic. There still isn't a daily flow, on top of the fact that I don't have daily functioning from my initial injury 7.5 years ago. So yes, she still documents what's going on around me. It just was not possible for me to do all of that time, and I truly needed somebody to pick up the information for me because it couldn't be done by myself. And once I got it on paper, everything I wrote and everything she has as well, and if I'm forgetting something or think that I don't remember something properly, she actually has it written down. So I can then verify this or that along the way. So then I let her know, what I was going, she knew all along what I was going to be doing. She just didn't know if or when I was ever going to reach that point. And she doesn't want to be known. That's why we call her Charmaine. So yes, all along the way, it took all this time to do. By the time I started writing this down and filming the videos, the majority of the memories had been back. Nothing had ever changed. No memory had ever came back wrong or came back a second time in a different manner. That had never happened. So I knew 100% of what I was remembering was real. And it did take her and all of these years and all these actions and criminal activity that was going on during the course of my injury, during the course of my mother preventing treatment in an extreme medical emergency as a hospital employee. While all that was going on, it was causing me to have more information on the crimes long-term and short-term. So all these different things that were happening, it was all tied back to the crimes, and there was reasons for it. So everything was just being put together. And then I finally started the flow of the videos, and then finally started releasing in January of 2025. I literally couldn't have done it any sooner than when I did. I really didn't know if I was going to ever be able to. I wasn't sure. And I knew the only way to stop this, because there is so many people and agencies involved. I knew the only way to stop it was to go public with this information, because there's so many high level officials, so many people with power in the local area who are involved in these crimes, that there's no way, no other way for me to go about this. I can't report the crimes. I had tried to report the crimes to many agencies, many different types of agencies along the way. And I started doing that in 2022. And I wasn't getting anywhere because it all sounds so absurd with the amount of people and agencies involved and the length of time this has gone on. And people live in a sheltered world. They don't actually live in what you see on TV, but I do. And I've been living that way my whole life. And so any person I'm trying to tell this to, doesn't matter what department they work for, they don't want to believe something like that is that extreme. And it's one individual fighting against all these people and agencies. So it made it very hard for me to get this information to an agency for them to investigate. where I wasn't really getting anywhere, and I just took matters into my own hands again, which is why Charmaine is involved, and had to go about this my own way. So by the time I'd started releasing, I fully knew the only way to have arrests be made, to get things back in order, to have any type of compensation or get anything to where I need it to be, is to go public with all of this. So that's what I've been doing for the past 8 months or so, releasing all these videos, talking publicly outing each individual and agency that I've been talking about on these videos. And I'm literally just scratching the surface. There's so many more to go. There's so many situations, so many long-term and short-term events that I have not even talked about yet, all criminal in nature, all against me. Every single thing going on was against me directly. And now along the way, you might have to ask yourself why somebody's mother would be targeting them to that degree over and over and over and over without a break from any of it, and has no intention of ever stopping. She's going to continue to break everything in my path until I'm either in jail or dead. So you might have to ask yourself why somebody would be doing that. So along the way, enough memories had come back, and part of these memories came back immediately after I died and came back the first time in January 2018. So a giant piece to all of this came back immediately upon returning from that. And the other pieces came back down the line, and it all fit with that initial significant amount of memories that came in that one chunk after I died and came back. Down the line, all the rest of the memories came to fit with that. And what it is there was a trust fund that was left for me by a man that my dad worked for. That's how he got started in the cemetery industry when I was very small. And he's the one who left me the trust fund. And that my mother had actually went in with the attorney after the man passed away and left my dad kind of mingling with the people that were attending also outside of the room, the private room we were talking to the attorney in, as each person was speaking to them about what they were left. There was a couple handfuls of people that were involved. It was not just me. And she went in there without my dad. So that's how she managed to pull all of this off without my dad knowing any of this. I do believe she stated something minor that he had left me, and she created so much chaos and destruction along the way. I'm sure he didn't even prior to his injury, probably doesn't even remember any of this. And she did that so that way she could make everybody forget and she could access this money and it would be hers. From day one of the time that funeral happened and the time I was left this money, she had no intention of ever notifying me or giving me what was rightfully mine. That's when she began farming all of these delusions about me, this false narrative about me from that time period forward, because she had every intention of keeping it for herself. And the stipulations were if I was deceased or incarcerated, or I don't know all of them, but it's something along those lines. And that's how she was going to gain access to this money. And then once I had my kids and had my own life separately at age 18 on, and still there's no contact between us, here she was portraying this false narrative that she had custody of and raised my older kids. She did that to gain access to that trust fund, stating that I'm just this mental disorder drug addict running the streets somewhere, dumped my kids off, she raised them. She went to that private attorney's office and had fraudulently accessed these funds using my older two kids, using this false narrative that she grew over time. That false narrative was allowed to continue because we had no contact, no relationship. I had nothing to do with any of her family, any of these people that she's portraying all this to. And that's how it was able to be carried out, because I completely separated, went my own way. But that's also why she was creating all this destruction and chaos from behind the scenes in my life, using these other people and agencies so she could try to make that false narrative about me look true to other individuals. Although the problem was everybody way underestimated me and the person that I really am. So it wasn't able to happen in that manner. I still managed to accommodate all this chaos, destruction, crimes, carry out my initial life plans with all of these setbacks, with all of these injuries, and managed to still hold on and carry it all out. So the false narrative she'd been telling everybody along the way was never real. It doesn't even look real at where we are today in 2025. Doesn't even look real. And no one was aware. Any of these people she had involved, any of these agencies, weren't aware everything they were told about me is delusions, because nobody ever took the time to speak to me directly. They all got their false information from her every step of the way. So all these people wholeheartedly believed her, helped her attack me, wipe me out, cause all these problems. And then she did all that so these family members could help back up that, oh yeah, she's had custody of these kids. Well, she did that to gain access to that trust fund fraudulently. So that's what's behind all of it. That's why it took so long to piece together. And because those two kids that she had access to are over age 18, that's why she had began hiring more people, more agencies. She began getting involved. Once my older two kids were both approaching age 18, she then created more destruction and chaos in my life, began bribing individuals to do certain things to me, insert themselves in my life, cause more problems, because she then needed access to the remaining funds because she wasn't going to have any more access to the money. That this attorney's office must have believed her that she really had custody of my kids, which was never real. And she committed all these crimes, all these actions along the way in the last few years leading up to today, because now those kids are over 18. With what she had done, it told on herself some more. So I was already piecing the destruction, the lies, the chaos, the crimes, the memories. I was already piecing it together for the past 7.5 years. In the last several years, once those kids were approaching 18, she then took it so many steps further, where her actions and all these other people's actions then continued to keep telling on herself further. And it gave me even more information on what was actually going on as well. So all of that put together, it painted a way bigger picture as I was remembering everything, as what was going on around me was going on in my actual waking life. And it pieced every little bit together to where I have it today, where I have the majority of the puzzle put together. I do know there's some of these people who are involved I've never even met. They don't know anything about the real me. All they know is the false narrative. So that's what's behind all of it. That's why it took me so long to piece together. That's why it took me so long to go public and out all of these people publicly. And I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep on going until somebody turns this into a Netflix series or several movies. It is that extreme. It is that extravagant. There is that much information. It would probably have to be numerous seasons of a long-term series in order to fully get somebody to understand what has all gone on and how extreme all of this has been. But that's why it took me so long. That's why I'm just now starting to release certain information, certain individuals, certain agencies. It took that long. It took all of everything that's gone on for me to get certain things situated, to even address it, to film the videos, to release it publicly. Now, if any agency had helped me along the way, it probably wouldn't have gotten to this degree. I maybe would have still done the videos, but they became more urgent because no agency was investigating starting in 2022 when I was trying to get help. Nobody was actually investigating. I was actually directed by the FBI to do what I had been doing from that point forward, where I'd been gathering the evidence myself. And that way I didn't just come in there with this story. That way I have some physical proof along the way, which I do now have. And that was at the direction of the FBI out of the Toledo office. So that I did do it all myself. I did do what they said. And now I do have the physical proof. So when I'm talking in these videos, a lot of this I have physical proof of. The majority of what I've spoke about already, I do have physical proof of. So it's not just some made up story. It's all verifiable. Arrests do need to be made. There was no way for me to do this prior, and there's no way to get it all in order and the situation under control, and what's owed to me rightfully returned to me and given to me, which should have been given to me decades ago, especially with everything I've had to spend just to keep my son and I alive, almost $200,000 out of pocket, on top of all the criminal wipeouts and the harassment of all these people and individuals and everything that's been lost. I've lost millions. And it's all due to this trust fund being left for me and my mother being jealous and envious of me from not only from the time I was born, it became even worse once this trust fund was left for me. So that just really topped it all off. That's where the attacks all became just nonstop. All the lies and delusions just being spread all over town. I was barely even old enough to communicate what was going on to somebody. I didn't even have the words for it at that age. I was like 5 years old, didn't even have the words to describe to somebody what was going on. And it just continued on from there, which is why I felt the dire need to cut her off immediately once I turned 18. It was so extreme at that point. I literally cut all ties, went the opposite direction. Here she was laughing like a deranged lunatic right off the rip about how I was never going to be anything, never going to amount to anything, never be successful. And she's laughing that way because she had every intention of using all these agencies along the way and all these people to continuously harass me once I cut ties with her, as she did all along the way of me growing up and going to school, like she did with all those teachers. She had every intention of continuing it forward so she could make sure she gained access to this money. So that's what's at the root of all of it. All the extreme chaos is what prevented me from releasing this any earlier than I have. And it is all my mother's criminal actions that led to the damage to my home, which led to me being able to film the videos and release them. So it's really her own criminal actions that allowed me to do this and release these videos to the public. And I will be telling every person, every agency involved, and I'm going to go even further into depth on all these other matters. I just have to get all this situated before anything else can be addressed. But that's why it took me all of this time to do that. This is the end result of everything she's been doing and where I am today with it, because this has been going on my entire life. And all the destruction and damage she's caused, and along with me being permanently injured, and with her role in preventing treatment within the medical system, falsifying our records within the medical system, it's caused a further issue. And there's no way for me to build my life forward with what's all going on in the background behind the scenes, all these people and agencies still involved, and they still have this agenda to continuously wipe me out so they can all take the bribery payments from my trust fund, as she had been paying some of these people as well. There's no way for me to get my life in order and pick up the pieces of all the destruction until this is situated and arrests are made. And then the money needs to be returned to me immediately, so I can actually start my life, because I've never been allowed to start my life truly. I thought I was numerous times after each wipeout. Here I thought I was starting my life each time separately, having nothing to do with her or her family members or any of these individuals. And it was all an illusion, because I wasn't fully aware at that time. At some of those times I was not fully aware of what was actually going on. And here I thought I was starting my life or restarting my life each time, and she was causing these wipeouts, but it's all due to the trust fund and where I am today because of the injury and what's all come out of it. There's no way for me to pick up the pieces and just build forward or restart and rebuild from the bottom up the way I did all these other times. I'm too injured. I can't go back and work for somebody else. How I managed to build everything from the ground up, I don't have the ability to do that. I can't punch somebody's clock. I spend quite a bit of time still incapacitated. I do suffer ongoing symptoms day in and day out, whether people realize that or not. That is how I'm forced to live. I live with a lot of pain and suffering in my brain mostly, and it does go other places as well, depending on the amount of exposures I've had. There's just no way for me to pick up the pieces without these arrests being made, the truth to fully come out, and the money to be returned to me, what's rightfully owed to me. And because she has stolen so much money over the course of all these years, everything that she owns belongs given to me, because she doesn't even have enough to compensate me. Just the losses, let's say I wasn't left a trust fund, just for what she's personally caused me to lose all these times over again, she doesn't even have enough to compensate me for the losses she's directly caused me, not including the trust fund. So all of this is owed to me. I don't know what the number is. It has to be a pretty high amount for all these people and agencies to be involved all these years. The amount of people, the amount of agencies, the lengths that these people have all gone, and what she has done and the lengths she has gone, tells me that the number was a pretty high number. So either way you look at it, all of her assets, everything she's ever worked for, and pretty much everything my dad has ever worked for, in the future does belong to me, and really sooner than later, because she belongs behind bars immediately. I have proof of all of these crimes. The majority of them can be proven. The majority of the crimes of the people and agencies helping her, a lot of that can be proven as well. I have more than enough proof. That is why I need investigators to reach out to me. But that is what is at the root. That's why I had to film the videos, because going forward, there is no going forward. She's created so much fallout from everything that's happened. And with the degree of our injuries and what I have to deal with daily, there's no way for me to get things flowing in a proper manner to even begin to live my life. I've never gotten to live my life. It's been this way my entire life. She's been doing this since the trust fund was left for me. I do believe it was 1989. I don't think it was into 1990 at the latest, but I do believe it was like 1989 when this happened. So at that time, I was like, what, 5, 6 years old? That's when all of this happened. And I had already caught her poisoning the batches of food around age 3 or 4 and had already confronted her on it prior to the trust fund being left for me. So she already knew, here I have an advantage over her. I've got this large trust fund left for me. I know she poisons food. I've already confronted her. And I didn't know that it was dangerous to confront her because of the age that I was. And people just believe that you're supposed to trust your parents. That I didn't know by saying that to her was actually going to cause her to do all these things to me and continue on with this harassment for a lifetime. So by doing that, I made a huge mistake as a 4-year-old kid. And that's what's been going on all of this time. So there's really no way for me to, pick up the pieces, try to build everything I had planned all along, try to get it all back in order to flow properly. It is slowly moving, not at the rate I need it to or want it to. But in order to have some comfortability and proper flow in my life, it has to be situated. So my main goal right now is releasing these videos, releasing them in a certain order. A certain amount of crimes come out first, then some of the other supporting videos and documentations and incidences that have happened along the way. I'm trying to do it in a certain manner. But that's what has to happen in order for me to pick up the pieces of my life. There's no way around it, especially due to the injury. If the injury had never occurred, which at the root is her criminal actions and escapades, because I would have never been in that building had she not gone on the 2013 escapade, there's no way for me to get it in order, have my life flow, carry out my plans going forward, produce the income that should have been flowing all along the way. All these years should have been going on for about 11, 12 years already with a solid flow without disruption. And there's no way to get that in order without these arrests being made. So I'm going to continue to make the videos. I'm going to continue to expose a lot more people and agencies. I'm literally just scratching the surface. There's so much more to go. Stay tuned for more. I will be back with more. Thanks. Bye.